Kathleen Kimley. Welcome to my studio. Come on in. As you can see, it's not very big, but it's a wonderful studio. I love it. I just got this new addition to my studio. It's a waving queen. She's solar powered. This painting here is something my son did when he was about 4, and I think it's lovely, so I have it there. Well, I have been a professional illustrator in the children's market for about 15 years, I would say. And Molly by Golly is my latest book, and it's my 10th or 11th book. I'm not quite sure the number. So I use a combination of traditional drawing and digital drawing and enhancement and traditional painting on top of that. Okay, Molly by Golly is a true story, and it takes place in the early 1800s in New York City, and she was the first female firefighter. She was the cook for the fire chief. One day it was very, very cold and blizzardy, and a bunch of the firefighters got the flu. And then she hears the bells ringing and the runners coming down the street saying, "There's a fire, there's a fire." So she throws on her shawl and runs outside and said, I'm going to help. Okay, so here is an illustration from Molly by Golly that I did, and I'm going to show you how I did it step by step. Step 1 is I work on my computer in Photoshop to do the drawings. I don't always do that. Sometimes I draw on paper. I actually prefer to draw on paper, but Photoshop has a lot of really cool things that it does that can streamline the whole process quite a bit. So the first step is to do a storyboard, and you can see this is the whole story laid out in thumbnail sketches, and they're done really quickly and not very accurately, but just to get the flow of the story and figure out what each chunk of text is going to, where to break the text up and how the pages will turn. Once I've got the storyboard done, the next step is to see how it will look as an actual book. So I create a dummy. It helps you to see how the pages turn and how the illustrations work in a book form. We can kind of zoom in on these sketches. Let's go to the one we're going to talk about. I have the gutter indicated here so we know where everything is going to be, and I knew I had to save room for type up here. It's very important to save room for type. So in Photoshop they have this little toolbar, and there's a brush pen, and then you can choose, I have it set for dry media brushes, which is charcoal, pencil, all those different kinds of things. Here's a number 2 pencil. That's a great one to start with. So for a sketch like this, just have it set to black. Here, let's make sure it's on the black. And it's 100% opacity, and you can just, draw anything you want. And then if you make a mistake, like I don't really want that there, I can go back and just take it out. When I'm done with the storyboard, I'll send it to the publisher, and we'll talk about the whole flow of the story and make sure I'm going in the right direction. And once I get that approved, then I go to the finished sketches. The way I do finished sketches for this type of a project is I'll just go ahead and copy my little storyboard thumbnail, and then I will start a new drawing. It's 18 inches wide by, say, 10 inches tall. Great big piece of paper. I put my little thing in there. It's not nearly big enough, but you can just transform it. So this saves me a ton of time just transferring, and also I don't lose the liveliness of my original sketch. And for me, and I'm sure lots of illustrators, keeping the liveliness in your original sketch is what you're almost always going for. And I'm going to go ahead and make that layer a little bit lighter because we're going to draw over the top of it. And then I'm going to add another layer, so then I can go to my pen and start to draw. And you can see it's really like a pencil line. It's really cool. The reason I go over the thumbnail sketch, even though it's nice and loose, just the way I want it, is to make sure, for particularly a book like this, that the details are accurate and that the characters are consistent. Also, I can clean up any mistakes and make any changes requested by the art director. So, here is the drawing printed out on my Epson R1900 large format printer, and it's printed on watercolor paper, and the ink that it uses is water not soluble. So you can, at this point, you can watercolor on it, you can color on it, you can do anything you want. So this is clear gesso, and I use that to coat the paper so the paper doesn't absorb the oil paints. Usually what I do is start with a coat of matte, acrylic matte medium, and then I top it with a coat of the gesso. And I use a spongy brush like this, just squirt it on, spread it out, and you're supposed to let it dry 24 hours. Here's my palette. I'm going to be working with oils, and I want to work in thin layers. For Molly by Golly, I'm using just 3 colors. One, it's easier not to lose your way with color if you limit the palette, and I want the line to show through. So I chose these colors for their transparency, and they mix up into the most amazing array of colors. We have alizarin crimson and Indian yellow for the yellow, ultramarine blue for the blue. Real thin layers. I'm not going to worry about the lines, any of that stuff. And I find when I paint, I end up wiping off as much as I put on. So you can end up adding and wiping away a lot. And one of the reasons I like to use oils is because they don't dry on you when you haven't made decisions yet. What I'm doing here is laying out the big blocks of color, and then later on I'll refine them as I go. I like to keep the paint thin so you can see the original drawing underneath a little bit, and so you can see the different colors. And I also like to keep the paint thin so I can go back in and draw right into the painting. Sometimes I like to use a number 2 pencil, just a mechanical pencil, and sometimes I like to use colored pencils, Prismacolors. Making the snowstorms was one of the most fun parts. I would let the painting dry, so that way I could go ahead and just put in my snowflakes and then wipe them out and put them in and wipe them out till I got them just as swooshy and swoopy as I wanted to. The technique I used for Molly by Golly was something I was actually learning as I did it. And every time I do a new project, I always want to try something new and try to do something better if I can. And I'm often inspired by other artists and think, oh gosh, I want to try to incorporate what they do into what I'm working on. So hopefully you've learned something from watching this, and good luck with your future projects.